All right, everybody. So today my guest is Kyle, and Kyle is the CEO of Proposify. Proposify is a software as a service company doing 7 figures in ARR. They'll help over 6,000 sales teams of growing companies deliver impressive client experiences and automate their sales workflow and close deals. He's also an angel investor, has been an entrepreneur for over 10 years, and have lived hustle, tenacity, and resilience. He shared what he has learned throughout his day. He has a blog, he's speaking a lot, he has a book coming out, and also he does a lot of videos and podcasts. So definitely Kyle Racki, do I pronounce that correctly? Or
That's correct, yeah.
Perfect. So Kyle is definitely a great addition to this podcast, because usually people who listen to this podcast are agency owners, SaaS founders, or consultants, something like that. And we can definitely talk about a few things here. Basically, if we could start off, I know you have a really interesting story. You posted on your blog. I read it, and it's really, really interesting. So if you could just maybe take us a little back for a couple of minutes, how did you actually, because I know you started an agency, that's kind of your initial entrance to the business. But before that, what made you to start your own business? And if you could talk about it for a second, that would be awesome to give our people some kind of context.
Sure, yeah. So thanks for having me on the show, Jan. And the name is actually Croatian. So it's Racki is technically how it's pronounced, but we always just say Racki. I guess my background and sort of how I got started, I didn't really come from an entrepreneurial family. Becoming a business owner was not one of my goals as a kid or as a teenager or even as a young adult. I feel almost like I fell into it. But what I guess was unique a bit about my history was that I was raised as a Jehovah's Witness. So my parents were Jehovah's Witnesses, and they raised me as one. So basically my whole life, all up until I left in probably my mid-20s, I was trained to go door to door and knock on strangers' doors and try to, sell the literature in a sense. And we also had speaking training. So we would, at churches, basically, they would give us public speaking training. And so I found that in a kind of a weird way, that background gave me some of the tools and skills that I needed to do what I do today, which is, sell, which you have to sell as an entrepreneur. You need to sell to people who you want to hire. You need to sell to customers. You need to sell to investors. Mm-hmm. And then speaking is something that you end up having to do a lot. That was sort of the background in the upbringing. And then what I did was I studied design, because that was really my passion, was creating and designing. And I went to school for it. And then a couple of years out, I had worked at agencies for a few years, and then decided to go out on my own as a freelancer. Mm-hmm. Did that for about a year, then started an agency. So that's sort of how the timeline of events looked. And then later, of course, I left the agency and sold it and started Proposify. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot there, but I'm not sure where you'd like me to go into the most detail.
Yeah, maybe one thing that stood out is you mentioned where you had to sell door to door. So do you actually think it really impacted maybe your sales skills, or can you really kind of see how that kind of helped you in a way? Or
I think so, because a lot of the training for how to preach door to door, really a lot of it applies to sales. They would teach us things like trying to find common ground with what they call the householder. I guess you could call it the lead or the prospect in sales. Overcoming objections, and just being able to I think a lot of sales is really just about getting out there and either picking up the phone call or going, in the case of door-to-door sales, or going to events. A lot of it is just getting yourself out there and being able to deal with rejection. And you're going to deal with a lot of rejection in sales. Probably for every yes, there's going to be 100 no's, or maybe 50 no's, or however many. And I think that was one of the things that it kind of prepared me for, because let's face it, most of the times, somebody's going to come on your door and try to sell their religion to you. Most people are going to say, I'm not interested. And so I just got used to hearing that and didn't take it personally. Mm-hmm. And I think that actually helps quite a bit for sales.
Yeah, I think definitely, especially in the niche of agency owners, where most of the agency owners, I have an agency and our clients are software companies who do mobile apps or something. And they are started by technical people. And I think they never actually experience the rejection, or because most agencies never sell. I mean, to be honest, they don't have a sales process. So most deals come through referrals, through your own network, recommendations. That's not selling really. A lead that comes through a recommendation already has a trust built in. There's no cold relationship there. So we have really problems when we talk to these agencies and trying to tell them that, okay, we can generate leads for you who are qualified, but you must actually be able to kind of convert them. And they have real problems, especially technical founders or designers, really creative people who haven't had that experience probably. So you're kind of a really good example of somebody who, had that experience and is also creative in a way. So that's awesome. And so how did you, yeah?
I was just going to say, in a way too, I mean, I think the upbringing made me dread it a little bit more too. Like even now I kind of get a bit of a sense of dread if I have to knock on somebody's door, even if it's just to tell them their car lights are on or something like that, or taking my kids trick-or-treating. I still get kind of this aversion to knocking on doors because it was actually so stressful, I think, as a kid, having to go and do that and worrying about if I was going to see my friends at school and how embarrassed I would be and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, absolutely. A lot of, especially technical co-founders, I think that's one of the biggest challenges that they have to overcome is the idea that, look, you can build the greatest piece of technology in the world, but it's not going to sell itself. You have to put yourself out there. You have to build a pipeline. And I think that's, training them with sales and giving them those tools is such an important piece.
Yeah, exactly. And so you found your way into the agency and then you started your own. So did you start, as most agencies typically start, that a freelancer decides to freelance and then it's a lot of work, so he hires more freelancers? Is that kind of the way you build your own agency, or how that come about?
Yeah, so when I was building the agency, it started off, I was a freelancer. I had design and development skills. So the thing as a freelancer is I always like to encourage people, if they're going to go it on their own as an entrepreneur, is freelancing is the best place to start. And it's kind of like what I refer to as a gateway drug to entrepreneurship. It's relatively low risk, low overhead, and it actually doesn't take that much in sales to be able to pay your bills, because you're really just providing for yourself. So that's what I had experienced, was that once I finally went out on my own and started selling, eventually, just if you do good work as a freelancer, people refer you, and suddenly you have more requests than you really can even take on, because it's just you doing it. But I think one of the biggest struggles is when somebody goes from a freelancer to an agency owner, the leap to get there it requires an entirely different mindset and an entirely different set of skills. What made you a successful freelancer is actually going to make you probably a horrible agency owner if you don't adapt, right? So like, for example, with a freelancer, like you just said before, most of your work comes through referrals. You don't really need to do sales very much as a freelancer. It's rare to, unless you do really horrible work. As an agency owner, the worst thing you can do is not pick up the phone and not build your own pipeline and that kind of thing. The other thing too is, as a freelancer, you rely on yourself and your skills to be able to do the work. Whereas as an agency owner, you have to build a team and rely on your team to deliver great work. And you, as the agency owner, need to basically build the business and work on the business, not to become a cog in your own machine.
And so what was that process like for you? Because I know that most freelancers, when they jump into the agency, they're still involved in project management, or they are like a CTO or something. So you had design and development skills, right? You've mentioned. So what did you just jump into also sales, or were you kind of part-time project manager, part-time, I don't know, CTO, part-time salesperson?
I had a business partner. So that was one of the reasons we started the agency, was because I was a freelancer. I had met Kevin Springer in the past agency that I was at before I left to go out on my own. And he was more of a business development kind of operations person. So our skills complemented each other quite nicely. He couldn't do the work. He wasn't a designer or a creative or a developer, but he was really good at selling, had a lot of experiences building other types of businesses in the past, and had worked at agencies. So we ended up partnering together. We called it Headspace, which is not the meditation app. I often get asked that now.
Yeah.
That came quite a bit after, but we call the agency Headspace. We built it for about 5 years together, where he would essentially, his role was to bring the work in and to go find the clients. And my job was to essentially manage the projects, usually lead kind of the design aspect of them. And then we started building a team that could also execute on the work: project managers, account managers, designers, developers. And I think where, when I talked about that evolution between freelancer to agency owner, we never quite made that evolution. And as a result, our agency struggled. We ended up selling it after about 5 years and kind of more or less escaped the agency. But I think a big reason why I consider it a failure is because we failed to evolve and adapt. And I took on too many of the projects and tried to become the lead designer, when I really, if I was to do it over again, should have been focusing on building the agency, building the team, and not becoming the bottleneck in my own business.
Were you guys remote, or did you have an office?
We sort of oscillated between the two states for a period of time. I think 1 year we were completely remote. We didn't have an office, and that wasn't because of any choice other than the fact that our lease had run up, and we were trying to look to save costs. So a lot of people worked from home, but they were still in the same city. So we did have a couple of team members in various parts of Canada or the United States, but for the most part, we were kind of an office culture.
And so how big was the agency at the point where it was like the biggest, probably when you sold it? Was it like, headcount wise, how many people did you actually have?
Yeah, at our biggest, we were only about 12 people. And, it's sort of weird to contrast that with where I'm at now with Proposify, the SaaS business, because we actually just today hit 70 people.
Really? Okay.
So
congrats.
Yeah, it's been quite a unique, quite a difference between running that. It was actually easier now to run a business with 70 people than it was to run a agency with 10 people.
Yeah, that's crazy. And so what were kind of the main issues that you decided to sell the agency? Maybe even like before trying to sell it, what were the biggest bottlenecks in terms of agency? Because I know, it's always different. Cash flow is a huge one. So what were kind of the biggest problems that you observed during those 5 years that you just couldn't help?
The agencies are an inherently very difficult business model. And I think if you know what you're doing and you do it right, it can be a very lucrative, profitable business. I think the reason most agency owners struggle, though, is because they usually make the same mistakes. And I made those mistakes too. So for example, cash flow is one of the biggest issues running an agency, which is unlike a SaaS business, for example, where there's monthly recurring revenue and you have many customers and they pay you a lot, on a regular basis. Agencies typically don't have that recurring revenue built in. Now, some of them get into retainers and monthly agreements and annual contracts. But a lot of them, especially in kind of the web design development space, everything is kind of a one-off project. So the amount of time it takes you to go through the sales process of trying to scope project, price it out, maybe write a proposal, pitch it in person. Maybe you're competing with some other agencies. Long sales cycle. Sometimes it can take months, 6 months. So I've even had deals take a year to close when I was running an agency. And then when you finally do close it, what we experience and a lot of agencies do is, as much as you try to get the price right and scope it appropriately, things always fall off the rails, right? Or clients are late delivering approvals or giving you content. So projects, just for one reason or another, always get delayed, which then hurts your cash flow because you can't invoice the next installment until a certain piece is done or until you get a certain approval. So unless it's managed very, very carefully and you price it as high as you possibly can to account for all that, your profit margins end up being incredibly narrow. And compound that with the fact that all of your expenses come out on a monthly basis, your rent, your payroll, but often you'll go through long periods where maybe the phone isn't ringing and you don't have any new clients in the door, or projects are stalled and you're waiting to invoice and collect. So that, I mean, in a nutshell, that's what makes it such a difficult business.
Yeah, it's really hard, especially if you don't make any profit after the end of the project. It's like, damn, why did we do that?
You feel like you're charging all this money, and sometimes clients feel like, depending on how much you're charging, maybe it's a $10,000 project, maybe it's 50,000, but clients always feel like they're paying a lot for it. But then when you as the agency owner start looking at your expenses and your operating budgets, sometimes you're not even breaking even.
Yeah. I mean, there are two ways. I mean, usually agencies do fixed projects, which you've mentioned, it's really hard to find a scope there, or they just do time and material pricing, which most clients don't want to do. So it's really a tough game to play. I mean, we are lucky because we're a marketing agency where we have retainers, we have monthly, revenue. So it's kind of predictable, even though sometimes like one client just failed to pay us, but it's not that crazy as if it is a development project or something along those lines.
Well, and the problem with time and materials too is that you punish yourself for being efficient. Mm-hmm. So usually, the better you get at a job, the more you want to, the higher a price you want to command for it. If I'm Martin Scorsese directing a movie, I'm going to command the highest price because I'm the best. But the problem with time and materials is you punish yourself for being efficient. Well, we got really good at it now, so it only actually takes us a very little amount of time to execute the project, meaning we don't make as much money off of it. So it's a difficult balance to get right. I think if I was to do it again, if we were building software, let's say for companies, what I would probably do is only sell sprints. So let's say a company came to us and said, build us a social network like Facebook, right? We've all had those clients come along that say, I want to build something that's kind of like Facebook, but I want to keep it really simple and not spend too much money on it. We all have those clients. So what a lot of agencies do is they go and they sit down and try to scope out and maybe do some discovery meetings and try to understand what the requirements are. And then they sit down with their developers and estimate, how long do you think it would take you to build this? And the developer kind of goes, I don't know, 100 hours maybe, which is a complete guess. And then the project manager pads it by 20% to account for overages. And then it ends up taking 1,000 hours to build, and it's still not what the client wanted. So I think the only way to get around that is to either charge a retainer, where you basically just say, we're going to build as much as we can this month, and whatever you get, or sell sprints. A lot of software development agencies do that, where they'll say, what you want to build a Facebook clone. Okay, great. Well, we'll build as much of it as we can within a 2-week sprint, and then we'll release that to your staging environment. And you're basically just paying for what we can do within that time period. And that's sometimes a way to get around the issue of scope creep.
Yeah. Well, what we usually do, we actually, before even give out pricing, we do a paid discovery. So clients pay us to kind of map out everything they want, and it's like paid, and it's a paid workshop. Especially development agencies can do that. None of our clients is using it because we work with software houses here, and it's like none of them is charging people for thinking. It's such a powerful thing because you can then charge more your clients because they already paid you for a workshop or something, because their scope is not right. So you have to still fix it, and maybe you'll come across some new ideas. So if we can charge it, software developers can definitely charge it. So
that's a great technique known as the foot in the door technique. So instead of trying to sell the $50,000 project, you sell the $5,000 upfront discovery, which basically you're just getting paid for your time to kind of meet with the client and understand the requirements a lot more. And then of course they're more likely to hire you for the $50,000 project because you've taken that discovery time to build their trust. So it's a great technique.
There are ways to do it. You can even say something like, hey, if you don't like what we come up with, you can just get a refund. So like there's really zero friction there. And many people really appreciate it, and they realize many new things when we speak with them. So implement it if you're an agency. And so what was the main reason to sell the agency then?
Well, for quite a few years, Kevin and I had wanted to get into product development. I think that was where our passion really lied, was building products and not selling hours, really, which is what you kind of do in an agency. We also, as I mentioned, weren't very good at running an agency. So So it became an easier choice to want to get rid of the agency business where we were struggling with cash flow. It was difficult to keep people employed. Sometimes we had to lay people off because we just didn't have enough work to keep them.
Mm-hmm.
And at the same time, we were working on Proposify and beginning to get that out there into the world. So at some point we had a, shit or get off the pot moment where it was like, okay, you can't run an agency and try to build a SaaS company. Both of them are going to fail if you try to do too much.
Mm-hmm.
So we have to kind of make a decision, and we were at a crossroads. And it was a very easy choice to say, you know what, let's go and try to find somebody to take over and run Headspace for us so that we can focus on Proposify.
Yeah, I'm actually at that point right now. So I'm I was thinking about starting a SaaS company. It's such a common thing when I speak with agency owners, they all want to do it. And most of them actually fail. Like most SaaS companies that I know, they actually never make anything. And it's like, it's a really hard transition from an agency owner to a SaaS founder. And I know you've actually written an article where you described your experience, where you had like 4 SaaS companies you were experimenting with, and some of them failed. So talk about that. Before Proposify, there were a couple of other ideas, right, you had. And so what is really essential, because in my perspective, any business, you must be in it for a long run, right? So that's kind of what I think. So what's your perspective on those, why those first 3 or 4 companies didn't really take off?
Yeah, I think that agency owners, a lot of the reasons why they get into SaaS, of course, are the same ones as ours, which is we want recurring revenue, where clients can be a drag sometimes to work with, they're demanding, and we want to just sell one product to many people. But I think what happens because they're agency owners is they tend to go ahead with the first idea they think of without doing a lot of customer research and digging into the market and truly understanding what they're trying to do before they start building it. They just go, hey, we have developers in-house. I've got a cool idea. They basically would call it I call it the napkin sketch. It's like, hey, I thought of this when I was drunk at the bar one night and drew it on a napkin. Now let's go and do it because we have the developers to do it. So then, of course, they start to use those in-house resources to build their product. Client demands always come before product works. So if a developer in your agency is treating your in-house SaaS product as a project, they're gonna drop it as soon as a client comes and has greater demands. And so I think that's probably why most agency owners fail at building products. Other than the fact that it's just hard to build a product and it's hard to get it, get a high amount of people using it and paying for it. That's hard in and of itself. I think agency owners also have some unique challenges there. So essentially, we fell into that trap when I was running Headspace, where a lot of our in-house product ideas were kind of just, they weren't fully thought out. So we had one that was kind of like a do-it-yourself website builder, similar to Wix or Squarespace before those came out. And again, that was just kind of like, hey, we have a bunch of clients who want us to build websites and they don't have the budget to work with us. Why don't we build a product to make that easier? But we didn't put a ton of focus into that. We didn't go and raise a lot of money and make that our full-time passion. So eventually it just kind of petered out because our product wasn't very good. It was kind of cobbled together with WordPress, and there were just better options out there. We built a social media analysis tool called Social Gopher, which again was just kind of a harebrained idea for the most part. We had clients that came to us that we did these manual social media audits for, and we just thought, hey, why don't we build a product to make that kind of automated? But again, it wasn't really our true passion. We didn't invest years of our life and raise money for it. So eventually we just it was more so that they petered out, not necessarily that they failed. They were never successful. So there was nothing to fail at. The difference I think with Proposify was the fact that it had been a problem. So basically Proposify, we build software that helps companies of all types, including agencies, write proposals and get sign off on them. And it was a problem that I had experienced for a long time, both working in agencies, being a freelancer, running my agency. And I actually had sort of the idea and the solution in mind as far back as like maybe 2005, 2006. And it was then 6 years later when we actually decided, you know what, let's just try that idea and see if that works. And so I actually got out and started talking talking to people, and I did a demo camp where I was basically pitching the idea. And I got such a massive amount of response from it, from people coming up to me and saying, we write proposals, we hate doing it, we'd love if there was a product that made that easier. So I think that market validation gave us the confidence to say, okay, I think we're onto something here. Now let's focus on it for a long time in order to make it successful. And it took many years for us to kind of hit product market fit and begin scaling.
That's awesome. And so really, I want to talk about Propulsify. So my first question would be, did you guys raise any money in the beginning seed round, or did you bootstrap, or how did it come by?
We bootstrapped for the most part. It started as an in-house project in our agency. The difference was we did receive a grant. The nice thing about living in Canada, and I think other parts of the world, there's not a lot of this in the United States, but a lot of times governments will give out grant programs, sometimes interest-free loans, if it's to help a technology company get a product to market. We applied for and ended up getting a grant program from the government that basically helped us cover 80% of a developer's salary to work on the product. So we ended up hiring a guy named Jonathan, who's now our CTO, and he worked on the product for about a year until more or less we had a handful of customers and the product was more or less working. So it was kind of a combination of bootstrap. We did put some of our own money into it. We also got a bit of this grant. We got a grant to cover a bit of his salary. But then when we had that moment where we said, okay, like we have a buyer lined up to take over this agency, it just happened to coincide with the timing worked out really well. So around the time that we got out of the agency, we also raised a seed round of funding for Proposify. We raised $270,000, which wasn't a huge amount. When you talk seed rounds, so that's pretty small, but it was enough to allow us to get out of the agency, focus, keep Jonathan employed, and then hire another developer to just keep working on the product. That was about 2014 when we raised that funding. Once we started scaling and hitting product market fit and now had more customers, we bootstrapped for the most part in that we just kept reinvesting profits to fuel growth. And then we raised another round of funding in 2018, just last year.
Was that like a Series A or?
Yeah, we would consider that a Series A. So we were originally actually going to raise 10, and that's what we tried to do. It was broken out into 2 different tranches. And so the way it actually went down and transpired was we raised 5 million last year. 3 of it we put in as capital into the business to fuel growth, and then 2 million was taken as secondary.
All right. And so regarding the product itself, I know it's supposed to help salespeople. I know there's some competition in your space. Maybe you can talk about the difference, because I'm pretty sure people are familiar with DocuSign. There's Proposify. There's another company called Quiller, which actually I use because they do like these landing page proposals, which I like to send to clients. So what's kind of your uniqueness in all that space? I don't know more companies like that. Maybe there's a ton of them.
Oh, there is. Yeah. You know,
PandaDoc, yeah.
PandaDoc is one. Proposal software has been really blowing up in the last few years. The market for it is growing. There's more and more competition coming out. So I think what we're always trying to do is figure out what do we do best and how do we really focus and communicate what it is that we do better than anybody else. And I think what it comes down to for us is, Quiller is a great tool. We're probably never going to be a Quiller in that we're never going to build proposals. For us are never going to be websites, which really is kind of Quiller's approach to the document. They're sort of saying like, get rid of the idea of a document, a proposal or a quote or whatnot is actually more like a website. Our approach is that proposals created in Proposify are still documents, but what we want to do is give people the most creative control and the most flexibility over their proposals. So essentially the kind of control that you would get maybe in InDesign or Google Slides or PowerPoint or any of those tools, you can do in Proposify, right? You can do full page background images. You can control the the typography. So it's really good for companies that care about their brand and want it to be consistent. But of course, you take the power of InDesign and and also add all the other great pieces of proposal software that make it easier to write proposals, like being able to reuse content very easily, being able to get it signed off and be able to track and know when did your client open it and where did they look. So all the other parts of automation and workflow improvements that make proposal software help them improve the proposal process. We do that, but we offer the most creative flexibility than probably any other competitor in the space.
Would you say that it's mostly used by enterprise people, enterprise sales guys, or is it used by agencies as well? Probably, but I don't know much companies around me who know that this exists. Like I'm surprised like how unaware people are. So who's your like typical customer profile? Yeah.
The interesting thing about proposal software is that even though there is more competition coming out, I think all of us who are in this space are still competing with the status quo, which is Microsoft Word and PDFs. Really is it's crazy that we buy all these great tools for marketing automation and sales automation, and then somebody goes through your sales funnel, and then the very last thing they do to basically give you money and agree to your deal is they get this PDF in their inbox that's like 20 megs that they have to open. And then maybe if you're super sophisticated, you'll get it like a DocuSign or something to get a signature on. But the whole process for creating proposals and as a customer signing off on them is pretty broken. And that's, I think, what we're trying to fix. In terms of who our audience is, we really serve the mid-market. We do have a lot of small customers who are maybe individuals or very small, like say agencies who use our product. But really, I think where we're going is more to serve the mid-market of companies that have sales teams. Sales team may be 5 people, it might be 10, it might be 20. But it's a team that regularly has to create those documents and get them signed off. And in terms of industries, it's actually quite varied. A lot of them are agencies, but a lot of them are also, HR and payroll software and SaaS companies, and even some construction and finance. So we find the industries set is pretty broad, but our perfect customer would be that sales director or that VP of sales running a sales team.
Are you guys like the biggest one in this space, or is there like, I don't know about the size of PandaDog or some of the others, but who's like the market leader?
Well, I mean, it's a hard question to answer, I think, because it depends on the market you're going after. There's competitors in the enterprise space that are quite large. Conga, I think, is one. Conga bought a company called Octave, which used to be called Tinderbox. They're more of an enterprise kind of tool, and so I think companies like Proposify and PandaDoc are moving up market and trying to sell more of those kind of enterprise deals. PandaDoc certainly is growing and a well-known competitor. They've raised a lot more money than we have at Proposify, and I think they have a larger team size. They're probably a bit further than us too in terms of customers and revenue. I would say Proposify, PandaDoc, and Quiller on the small business end of things are the 3 market leaders.
And so how do you have mentioned you have 70 people, right? So just like how big is your sales team? Maybe do you even have a sales team? Because I know is there a free trial for your software? I think so, right? So how does that work? How do you acquire those customers?
We do have a 14-day free trial, and we have small plans. So a lot of customers who will sign up to a trial and then sign up to a paid plan after their trial would be probably on that $19 per user per month plan, or sometimes the $49. The mid-tier plan is $49 per user per month. But we have a sales team of about 15 people, and those include what they call BDRs or SDRs, sales development reps or business development reps, who their job is to go out and find new prospects and qualify them. So if somebody signs up to a free trial and we discover that, wow, that's actually a company with a 20-person sales team, it would be on that SDR to then try to get them on the phone to try to understand more about their needs. And if they get qualified as a good prospect, then the SDR would then pass them to an account executive or an AE, and the AE would then set up the demo, try to understand more of their needs, and then try to figure out what plan is best for them. Should it be a mid-tier plan, or should they get more like a custom kind of enterprise plan?
Mhm. That's really interesting because that seems quite advanced as a sales process because most companies are not that sophisticated. So it's pretty good. So the SDRs, they don't really do any kind of outbound. All the free trials that sign in, there's kind of like some process for lead scoring, and then they are assigned with some leads and they qualify them. Is that the process? Or do they also go out and hunt?
Yeah. So we have an outbound sales team of about 5 people, and that's made up of the BDR. So the way every company, it's a little bit different, but what we tend to do is we say BDRs are the outbound people. So they're the ones who are actually researching companies, trying to find good fit, and then reaching out to them over email or maybe calling them and trying to even just educate them. Because like you said, there's even more companies who have the problem and just don't know that a solution exists. So our outbound team are the ones who are actually trying to find the companies and just educate them and say like, hey, you guys write proposals. Did you know we can help you with that? And then if any good leads come from that, then they would pass them up to an AE. The SDRs are more like the inside sales reps. So they're the ones who they might see that somebody signed up for a free trial. It might be that somebody downloaded one of our free pieces of content who ends up lead scoring quite high. Or it could be somebody who actually requests a demo and says like, hey, I want to demo this. And if the SDR qualifies them and says, okay, actually they would be a good fit for a demo, then they'll pass them up to the AE to demo and close.
Mm-hmm. It's pretty good. So I was wondering about a few things because maybe I always ask these questions, which are sort of non-related to business, but what's kind of your long-term vision for Proposify, or maybe just like outside of Proposify, maybe just in business in general?
I think we're in a very exciting time right now in Proposify. The market's growing. There's a lot of interest in this space right now, and I think there's a lot of opportunity to become the market leader. I think in some ways we're the market leader on the small business side, like I had mentioned, but I think there's an even bigger opportunity to become the market leader in the mid-market and enterprise. So I think that's really where we're focused right now. Is we want to say, how do we automate and simplify personalized high-touch sales? That's really the mission for Proposify. Right now, Proposify is our core product that does that. Down the road, there might be additional products that help with that mission as well. So I think the future is quite open in terms of where it can go. We obviously want to scale and hit certain revenue milestones as well. That's the journey we're on right now. As far as personally, like you had mentioned at the beginning of this that I wrote a book called Free Trials and Tribulations. That was sort of a personal project, a hobby kind of thing. But yeah, I don't know where the future will be as far as my aspirations. But we're on a pretty cool ride right now.
Can you share any revenue numbers, like what's the ARR or something like that?
Yeah, so we are just about 6 million in annual recurring revenue, and our goal is to try to hit 10 this year, 10 million.
Mm-hmm. And so one thing I forgot to mention, I actually saw your video on YouTube about cold emailing, I think. Yeah. There's like one video where you say like, this is the best cold email I ever got or something like that. And yeah, I have over 400 videos on YouTube about cold emails. So I think I actually went inside your tags and copied your tags. So I'm now ranking with your video on the suggested bar on YouTube. That was like a year ago or something, but I just remembered it now. And so,
how dare you copy my tags?
Well, I went inside and I looked at the source code and I saw your keyword, the keywords, or how do you call them in YouTube? And tags, yeah, and I just stole them. Yeah, so sorry for that.
I'm so angry.
I'm
just kidding.
Yeah, and so I was wondering a few other minor questions. Maybe if you can share with us, when do you go to sleep usually, and when do you wake up?
I've actually been getting better. Back when I was a younger man, I was probably more like going to bed really late. I was a night owl, kind of working until like 4 a.m. and then sleeping until about 10 or so. I've kind of balanced things a little bit better. So now it's pretty typical, I would say. Probably go to bed around 11 p.m. and wake up around 7.
Okay, sounds good. And so do you work from home or do you go to the office, or?
I happen to be home today just because I've got some deliveries coming, and
Mhm.
we actually just built a house, so we've got contractors over here. But no, normally we have an office in the city of Halifax, Nova Scotia, which is in Eastern Canada,
Mhm.
where the majority of our staff work, and then a couple remote employees.
Got it. Is there any favorite kind of entrepreneur that you follow or you kind of are inspired by?
I think like the big name kind of rock star entrepreneurs. There's things I like about different. There's things I like about all of them. I'm a big Gary Vaynerchuk fan. I think a lot of his videos and some of his content's pretty inspiring, pretty neat. And I think I share a lot of his views about business. Um, I would say he would be the number one. Um, there's aspects of like Bezos and Elon Musk and those guys that I like as well. Although I think in certain philosophies of theirs, I also strongly disagree with. So
Hmm. Yeah,
yeah,
Gary, very similar to you. He has an agency, so there's a lot to relate to.
yeah,
Uh,
absolutely.
do you
There,
read?
there's
Yeah, go
I
ahead.
think I think that some of the neatest entrepreneurs are the ones that you've never heard of. The
Hmm.
ones who they fly completely under the radar. There's some locally that I know who I'm quite inspired by, and that's more on a personal level, I think, because you get to see more of what they're doing when you know them personally.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean that's exactly right. Um, is there any book you read or you read lately that kind of stuck with you, or do you read often? I don't know.
I do. I actually try to make a point to read one book a month. I don't always get there, but that's the goal for this year is to read 12 books. Kind of a slow reader, so it's a little hard. Um,
Is it just business or?
it tends to be business. Although I'm trying to. Last year, I read Lord of the Rings again for the first time in about 15 years.
Nice.
I got through the whole thing, so I'm trying to balance it a little bit. I tend to not really read a lot of fiction.
Mhm.
Um, it tends to be business focused. The book actually I just finished the other day was Radical Candor by Kim Scott. Um, and that I'm really excited about that because as a company scales, you then need to scale your management team. Like I can't personally have a relationship with 70
Mhm.
employees. So it's important for the managers and the department leaders at Proposify to all have a very consistent way of leading their teams and doing it effectively. Um,
Mhm.
I would hate to have to own a company where I've got bad bosses and bad managers at the company, and especially if that's me, if I'm the bad boss. So radical candor is a really, really excellent framework to make sure that you're you're challenging your teammates and giving them direction and feedback and criticism without being an asshole and doing it with personal care and integrity. That and I was completely blown away by that book.
Sounds good. And maybe a last question: is there any favorite business app that you use often? Can be anything
Business apps.
except Proposify.
Well, Proposify, of course, but mobile desktop, does it matter?
No, it doesn't.
Um, I'm trying to think. The funny thing is that as I've gotten less and less involved in all of the weeds of Proposify, a lot of what I find myself I'm in more is like Google Docs and Google Drive and that kind of stuff. But one really cool thing, if you build a product or if you're building products maybe for your clients, is Heap Analytics is really cool. And it's basically a way that it's a tool that gathers all of the usage metrics, all the clicks, all the page views in your product. And then you can run really cool reports on, how many people clicked on or used a certain feature, and you can really break it down by audience and segment. And it's a very powerful tool. If you run a product business, you absolutely need a tool like Heap Analytics.
Heath Analytics. Okay.
Heap, sorry, HEAP.
Okay, got it.
Yeah.
All right. So I'll make sure to write it into the description. Cool. So that's it. I know you're busy. So Kyle, thank you very much for stopping by. And I know it's probably morning in your time zone. So
About noon, actually.
noon already. Okay. So thank you very much for taking this time from your day. And maybe we'll catch up sometime next year or something like that and see how Proposify is growing. That would be cool to
For
see.
sure.
So thanks very much, and see you later then.
All right. Well, thanks for having me on the show.
Yeah, no problem. Bye-bye.
Bye.